Speaking of two-a-days, I still like to have a nice little wardrobe change because it just makes me feel a little more comfortable. I can't sit here and indict yoga for being demonic. Uh, you know, I was raised in a home that had such spiritual aggression in a positive way, in a good way. Words don't mean anything anymore. But when we made it a priority to build our individual and family homes upon as good of a rock as we could find. And pliability, I know that's a word Tom Brady has made very popular because of his consultant. But pliability, if you're going to apply it to the body, you need to apply it to the soul also. And in the Acts of the Apostles, when Peter has a vision about clean and unclean food, it's important that we don't reject any foreigners because of our own preconceived notions about them, including those within ourselves. Abraham visited a king and he lied and said Sarah was his sister and rather than his wife, and then God had to give Pharaoh a dream about the real truth. That had to be embarrassing for Abimelech, you know what I mean? But, you just when you know someone's chosen by God, once you find that out, you're like, whoa, let's leave that alone. So, we're always refining, and we're always washing. Naaman had to dip 7 times in the Jordan in order to be clean. Elijah sent his assistant out, I believe 7 times, to see what the forecast was. And the 7th time there was a cloud the size of a small hand that arose out of that. And so when we talk about balance, it's not just about, a Bosu ball. It's it's a spiritual principle. We talk about America being asked to think about a globe in school, while Israel gets a firmament for protection. There's balance everywhere. And so there's employment and there's unemployment. There's white America and there's black America. There is good and evil. There's war and there's peace. And Solomon says there's a time for sowing and there's a time for harvest. And so when you have these balances all around us, there has to be one unifying principle. Otherwise, balance can't happen. Whether I'm sitting in this chair because of gravity or density, does it matter what we call it if we are operating in a singular reality? I've never wanted to be anything more than a vessel for what God wanted from me. So when you try to manipulate reality with pieces of paper You know, God didn't create me as a piece of paper. I'm a spirit that inhabits a body. And it's a beautiful tapestry that the Lord has allowed us to live. We have moments of anger and frustration. And then the enemy, before we can reset and find harmony and peace again, the enemy likes to introduce shame. But did anyone who ever truly loved you, that ever truly loved you, make you feel ashamed of yourself? Sometimes that survivor's remorse makes us feel ashamed of our very existence. Because we see the shame in others when they do us harm, knowingly or unknowingly. But think about the other side of this coin. I can sit here and reflect with you because of the peace that my father paid for. That my brother paid for. All I ever wanted to do was balance that equation. We were talking earlier about my mother's final moments. We're supposed to have this great emotional breakdown because of the loss of the other side of our umbilical cord. But I have so much relief because she is no longer here. I saw so much fatigue in her face the last year. We were trying to combat it with different routines I was writing for her in the gym. And she had about 8 weeks of very excellent progress. And I was so happy that I could finally coordinate that a little bit. Rather than the traditional routines that I myself went through in middle and high school, I was able to tailor a program for her needs that allowed her to, even without my supervision, come home with more energy than when she left. And, this is a luxury American white and black families may not appreciate, but in our community, the idea of the maintenance through fitness, physical fitness, isn't as prioritized of a thing. And I didn't need an engineering degree necessarily to go out and find this. I just needed willing teachers. And my biggest obstacle in this life has always been finding willing teachers and honest teachers. But growing up in a white evangelical church environment and seeing the contrast between that culture and my own, I recognized that there was always going to be a missing element of character. That is what taught me to go outside my community for the remainder of the equation. And I believe the enemy knows that as well, which is why we're instructed not to look at the beauty of the African diaspora, only at its corruption. I appreciate black women so much. And there's a lot of poison in that well, for sure. But think of how much poison they had to suffer through. And here I come, strolling in like John Travolta, rubbing people's feet and stuff, dancing off beat, taking over poetry slams and stuff. Silly behavior. You were so patient with me, and I appreciate it. I can only give you 80%, I'm afraid. But that's not what my heart desires. And as much as I love my father, I know that the strength of his oratory and literacy structure did not come from him originally. He created his own shark coochie board. I'm wearing my war hoodie. Makes me feel safe. I would happily lose a game to Michael Jordan in this outfit. Because this belongs to me. I've said many times that I despise moral victories. And I despise the fact that people that truly want to serve the Lord have to be satisfied with this. And sometimes I get frustrated by all the deception in the word, so-called word, the Bible. The idea of the end times has always frightened me. The mystery of prophecy. What will happen at the end of the age? Will we go anywhere? Is God Jewish? Will we have to live with white people for eternity? My internal logic tells me that that is a shame tactic of the enemy. Because even in moments of paid deception, whether it was from HBCU participants or co-op promoters that had a vendetta, or plenty of fish dates that were designed seances or whatever, I don't go into those things with that mind frame of malice. I went to Dallas to educate myself so that this would have some lasting value. I was given everything I needed to carry this cross at the beginning. We're told that Samuel was called by the Lord in Eli's home at 9 years old, and not a single word of his fell to the ground. But then we're also told that Saul consulted a medium to conjure Samuel and speak to him afterwards. I never liked that. The shame tactic of Christianity is looking at white culture and assuming the Lord operates like that. The Lord is not the author of confusion. The fruit of the Spirit is love, joy, and peace. Peace does not require food, does not require water, it does not require potency, it does not require size, it does not require abs, it does not require height, it does not require drip, it does not require a crown. If you don't have these things prior to your accoutrements, you'll never get them, or you'll never get it. I look at people like DJ Vlad or Traplore Ross that exploit the violence in Chicago, so-called violence in Chicago. I think you guys are doing a great job, by the way. Chicago, not those two idiots. Yeah, we've got some magnet school systems that are probably corrupted a little bit, and Rahm Emanuel didn't do us any favors. But getting into the weeds, into the minutia, I don't think that's the way to go at this stage in the game. I want my friends to have peace. And I think if you take an honest audit of my time in Dallas, I gave more than I took. I don't really think I took that much, to be honest. I wanted to tip well because Indians don't have a history of doing that. I wanted to be clean and hygienic to balance the scales that way. I wanted to be sexually viable to give a blueprint of understanding for our young boys to have confidence in themselves and marry our young girls and have families of dignity and honor with the same healthy patriarchal structure that I was raised with. I wanted our women to look at our young men the same way I've been looked at several times, with a healthy awe and approval. Even if my self-esteem came from a lie, I wanted to pass down the truth to you. Because with very little, my father passed down the truth to me. Just like Ray knows what divine power is, my father knows what wealth is. That's what saddens me the most. And the logic, which I learned from you people, tells me that he would never deny me something unless he knew it was unsafe for me to have it. And it would only be unsafe if there was an element I was unaware of. So, publicly, I act as a conduit of peace and safety via the Spirit of God Himself to protect my own sons. This is how we must war against the enemy. In Enter the Dragon, Bruce Lee instructs a student briefly on combat strategy. Two main lessons were: never take your eyes off your opponent even when you bow, and emotional content is different than anger or exhibitions. I appreciated those lessons, but one thing my father taught me is that beyond emotional content, there is spiritual clarity. We must be like water. We must be able to flow or crash whether we're in a cup, a teapot, or whatever other container the Lord places us. We must distribute ourselves accordingly. I see the beauty of black culture, but I also saw some of its limitations. And so for the past 10 years, and even further than that, I did my best to operate as water, to fill in the gaps of a jar full of rocks and pebbles. Because together, we can become more full than either of us could have been alone. It's my personal wish to always come back to love. So my war will be against my own shame, from whatever source. And I hope, as you watch me combat this publicly, that you're able to find a conduit for your own peace. In that way, we can be one, both now and in eternity. See you around.